Welcome back to the Class Concurrent Gaming Podcast, a weekly podcast that gives you information, background, and history of some of your favorite video games of all time. Episode 2, we're going to the mid-90s. It was a time when a new console emerged on the horizon, the Sony Playstation. Sony got their mitts into the video game market. They needed a competitor for the gigantic juggernaut that is Nintendo with Mario. Who'd they look to? They looked to Crash Bandicoot. And that will be our episode 2 video game podcast this week. All information is provided by Wikipedia. Crash Bandicoot is a 1996 platform video game developed by Naughty Dog and published by Sony Computer Entertainment for the PlayStation. The player controls Crash, a genetically enhanced bandicoot created by the mad scientist Dr. Neo Cortex. The story follows Crash as he aims to foil Cortex's plans for world domination and rescue his girlfriend Tana, a female bandicoot also created by Cortex. The game is played from a third-person perspective in which the camera trails behind Crash, though some levels feature forward-scrolling and side-scrolling perspectives. After accepting a publishing deal from Universal Interactive Studios, Naughty Dog co-founders Andy Gavin and Justin Rubin set out on a cross-country road trip from Boston to Los Angeles. During this time, they decided to create a character-based action platform game from a three-dimensional perspective, having observed the graphical trend in arcade games. Upon meeting, Naughty Dog and Universal Interactive chose to develop the game for the PlayStation due to Sony's lack of a mascot character. The game's main character was tentatively named Willie the Wombat. Glad they changed that. And cartoonists Joe Pearson and Charles Zambellis were hired to help create the game's characters and story. Crash Bandicoot was named for his habitual destruction of crates, which were inserted into the game to alleviate emptiness in the levels. Sony agreed to publish the game following a demonstration from Naughty Dog, and the game was unveiled at E3 1996. Crash Bandicoot was released to generally positive reviews from critics who praised the game's graphics, presentation, audio, difficulty level, and title character, but criticized its linearity and lack of innovation as a platform game. The game went on to sell over 6 million units, making it one of the best-selling PlayStation games and the highest-selling ranked on sales in the United States. For the game's Japan release, the gameplay and aesthetics underwent extensive retooling to make the game more palatable for Japanese audiences, and as a result, achieved a commercial success in Japan. Crash Bandicoot became the first installment in an eponymous series of games that would achieve critical and commercial success and establish Naughty Dog's reputation in the video game industry. A remastered version was released as part of the Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy in 2017. Information about the gameplay. Crash Bandicoot is a platform game in which the player controls the titular character Crash, who is tasked with traversing levels to defeat Dr. Neo Cortex and rescue Tana. The majority of the game takes place from a third-person perspective in which Crash moves into the screen. Certain levels that require him to flee from a rolling boulder reverse this perspective, while other levels are played from a traditional side-scrolling perspective. Crash is capable of moving in all directions aside from moving left and right. He can move away from or toward the player, and the controls do not change with his position. His two primary forms of offense consist of jumping onto enemies and performing a spinning attack that kicks enemies off the screen. Kicked enemies can strike other enemies that are currently on the screen. Two levels involve Crash mounting and steering a wild boar that accelerates uncontrollably, requiring him to maneuver around obstacles and bypass enemies. Scattered throughout each level are various types of crates that can be broken open by jumping on them, spinning into them, or knocking a kicked enemy into them. Most crates contain Wampa fruit that can grant Crash an extra life if 100 are collected. Some crates displayed an icon of which they contain. Crates displaying Aku Aku will grant Crash a floating Aku Aku mask that protects him from a single enemy or hazard. Collecting 3 masks consecutively grants Crash temporary invulnerability from all minor damages. Crates marked with a C act as checkpoints, while Crash can respawn after losing a life. Metallic crates marked with an exclamation point cause an element of the surrounding environment to change if they are struck. Jumping on red TNT crates triggers a 3-second timer that culminates in an explosion, while spinning into them causes an immediate detonation. In roughly half the game's levels, certain crates contain tokens in the likeness of Tana, Cortex, or his assistant Nitrous Brio. Collecting 3 tokens of a single character will transport Crash to a bonus round, where he must break crates in a side-scrolling area. Falling off the screen during a bonus round will not cost the player a life, but will send Crash back to the point in the level where he was transported from. A few levels contain bonus rounds for two different characters. Tana's bonus rounds are designed to be the easiest and most plentiful, and clearing one enables the player to save their game. Brio's bonus rounds are more difficult, featuring more TNT crates and require more precise jumps. Cortex's bonus rounds are the most difficult and are only included in 2 levels. Clearing Cortex's bonus round grants Crash a key that unlocks a secret level. Clearing a level without losing a life, and after breaking all of its crates, excluding crates and bonus rounds, will grant Crash a gem, which will be displayed by the level's name on the map screen. If the player clears a level in 1 life without breaking all the crates, a screen displays the amount of crates that were missed, and if the player loses any lives over the course of the level, they will instead be sent directly to the map screen upon the level's completion. While most gems are clear and colorless, 6 colored gems enable Crash to access areas in previous levels that he was unable to reach before. Collecting all 26 gems unlocks a special epilogue sequence accessible from the game's penultimate level. The plot of the game. In a secluded archipelago 300 miles west of Tasmania, the mad scientist Dr. Neocortex uses his Evolvo Ray to genetically alter the local wildlife into anthropomorphic army of soldiers for the purpose of world domination. Among these soldiers is an eastern bandicoot named Crash, who Cortex selects to be the general of his army. The day before Crash is subjected to the Cortex Vortex, a machine intended to brainwash him, he becomes attached to a female bandicoot named Tana. Crash is rejected by Cortex Vortex and is chased out of Cortex's castle, plummeting to the ocean below. As Cortex prepares Tana to be used in Crash's place, Crash washes up on a smaller island and resolves to rescue Tana and defeat Cortex. He is aided in his mission by Aku Aku, a witch doctor spirit who acts as the guardian of the islands. Crash undertakes a trek across the archipelago that spans several months. He traverses through a native village and defeats the hostile tribal chief Papu Papu. Cortex receives news of Crash's approach, and he dispatches his soldiers to dispose of Crash. After Crash defeats Ripperoo, Koala Kong, and Pinstripe Poturu, he reaches Cortex's stronghold and faces Cortex assistant Dr. Nitrous Brio, who battles Crash by ingesting a potion to transform himself into a giant green monster. Crash escapes to Cortex's airship, where Cortex boards a hovercraft and attacks Crash with a plasma gun as his castle burns behind him. Crash deflects Cortex's energy bolts against him and sends Cortex falling out of the sky. Tana embraces Crash as the two ride Cortex's airship into the sunset. The epilogue elaborates on the fates of the game's boss characters following Cortex's defeat and disappearance. Papu Papu sells the remains of Cortex's castle to a resort developer and uses the proceeds to open a plus-size clothing shop. Ripperoo undergoes intense therapy and higher education, and authors a well-received book discussing rapid evolution and its consequences. Koala Kong moves to Hollywood and becomes a film actor. Pinstripe opens a sanitation company in Chicago and prepares for a gubernatorial campaign, and Brio discovers a love of bartending. Let's go into some development of the game. On January 5th, 1994, MCA Inc. Executive Vice President Skip Paul established Universal Interactive Studios, a division for developing and publishing video games and interactive software, in response to a film industry trend of studios opening similar divisions. With this development, Universal Interactive was eager to acquire independent developers with the intention of eventually using them to create games and interactive movies based on Universal's existing franchises. At that year's Winter's Consumer Electronics Show, Naughty Dog founders Andy Gavin and Jason Rubin displayed their latest game, Way of the Warrior, in search for a publisher. By chance, their booth was situated in close proximity to that of Universal Interactive, where Mark Cerny and Rob Benayes served as its representatives. A bidding war broke out between Universal Interactive, the 3DO company, and Crystal Dynamics. Universal Interactive won the game's publishing rights by offering Naughty Dog a place on their lot and funding for 3 additional games, over which Naughty Dog would have created freedom. This atypical agreement ensured that Naughty Dog would be locked in long enough to create a product that met Universal Interactive's expectations. In August of 1994, Gavin and Ruben began their move from Boston, Massachusetts to Los Angeles, California. Before leaving, Gavin and Ruben hired Dave Beggett, their first employee and a friend of Gavin's from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Baggett would not start working full-time until January of 1995. During the trip, Gavin and Ruben studied arcade games intensely and noticed that racing, fighting, and shooting games had begun making a transition into full 3D rendering. They initially considered a 3D beat-em-up based on Final Fight before recognizing that their favorite video game genre, the character-based action platform game, had no 3D games at this point. The pair were especially fond of Donkey Kong Country and wondered how such a great game could function in 3 dimensions. They figured that in a 3D perspective, the player would be constantly looking at their character's back rather than their profile, and thus jokingly called the hypothetical project Sonic's Ass Game. I love the name of that. Gavin and Ruben had a rough game theory designed by the time they reached Colorado, and they discarded a design for AI, Osaurus and Dynastine, a side-scrolling video game based on time travel and scientists genetically merged with dinosaurs. Naughty Dog met with Cerny after moving into the Universal City, California offices. The group unanimously liked the Sonic Ass Game idea and discussed what video game system to develop it for, deciding that 3DO, Atari Jaguar, Sega 32X, and Sega Saturn were unsatisfactory options due to poor sales and development units that seemed to be, quote, clunky. The team ultimately chose to develop the game for Sony's Playstation, considering the company and consoles, quote, sexy and taking into account the company's lack of an existing competitive mascot character. After signing a developer agreement with Sony, Naughty Dog paid $35,000 for a PlayStation development unit and received the unit in September of 1994. A development budget of $1.7 million was set for the game, and production began in October 1994. Ruben and Gavin were the 44th and 45th individual developers to sign on to development for the PlayStation. And according to Ruben's approximation, Crash Bandicoot was the 30th game to begin development for the PlayStation. David Siller was assigned as the game's producer by Universal Interactive due to his expertise in game design, despite Gavin and Ruben's reluctance toward having a producer. For the game's lead character, Naughty Dog wanted to do what Sega and Warner Bros. Did while designing their respective characters, Sonic the Hedgehog and the Tasmanian Devil, and incorporate an animal that was, quote, cute, real, and no one really knew about. The team purchased a field guide on Tasmanian mammals and selected the wombat, poodle and bandicoot as options. Gavin and Ruben went with Willie the Wombat as a temporary name for the starring character of the game. They never intended that name to be the final due to the name sounding, quote, too dorky and to the existence of a non-video game property of the same name. The name was also used by Hudson Soft for its Japan-exclusive Sega Saturn role-playing game, Willie the Wombat. While the character was effectively a bandicoot, he was still referred to as Willie the Wombat, as a final name had not been formulated yet. The villain of the game was created while Gavin and Ruben were eating near Universal Interactive Studios. Gavin came up with the idea of an evil genius villain with a big head, who was all about his attitude and his minions. Ruben, having become fond of the animated television series Pinky and the Brain, imagined a more malevolent version of the Brain, with minions resembling the weasel characters in Who Framed Roger Rabbit. After Gavin put on a voice depicting the attitude in mind for the character, he and Ruben instantly came up with the name Dr. Neocortex. Following their previous experience with Way of the Warrior, Gavin and Ruben recognized that a larger development team would be required to recreate the new game. As they settled into Universal Interactive's backlot, Gavin, Ruben, and Baggett befriended Taylor Kurosky, a visual effects artist who was working on the television series Sequest DSV in the same building. Kurosaki, who had been using Lightwave 3D in his works, was attracted by the opportunity to learn and use Power Animator and became Naughty Dog's next employee on January 5, 1995. Bob Raffay was also hired around this time and was assigned as the game's art director. In March 1995, Universal Interactive and Naughty Dog recruited Joe Pearson of Epoch Inc. to add in the visual aspect of production. Pearson in turn recommended that Charles Zambellis of American Exodus be brought on board as well. Pearson and Zambellis would meet with Naughty Dog weekly to create the characters' environments of the game. The main character's nature as a Tasmanian animal and the trope of evil geniuses like Cortex possessing island strongholds determined the game's mysterious island setting. Pearson created a concept Bible that included detailed backstories for Crash and Cortex and established the game's setting and the remnants of the lost continent of Lemuria. Zambellis' initial sketches of Crash depicted him as a squat, hunkered-down character. After Pearson drew a version of Crash that was leaner and a larger nose and wore a Zorro-like mask, Zambellis began drawing Crash as a little more maniac and insane. Naughty Dog decided early on that there would be no connection between a real animal and Crash's final design, which would instead be determined 51% by technical and visual necessity and 49% by inspiration. Gavin determined Crash's fur color by creating a list of popular characters and their colors, and then making a list of earthly background possibilities, such as forests, deserts, beaches, etc. Colors that would not look good on the screen were strictly outlawed, such as red, which would have bled on older televisions. Orange was selected by process of elimination. Crash's head was made large and necklace to counter the low resolution of the screen and allow his facial expression to be discernible. Rubin noted the increased difficulty in turning Crash's head with this type of design. Small details such as gloves, spots on Crash's back, and a light-colored chest were added to help the player determine what side of Crash was visible based on color. Crash was not given a tail or any flappy straps of clothing due to PlayStation's inability to properly display such pixels without flickering. The length of Crash's pants were shortened to keep his ankles from flickering as they would with longer pants. Crash was originally written as a speaking character who, as a result of his subjection to the Cortex Vortex, communicated in a series of bizarre, non-sequitur derived from classic literature and pop culture. The team ultimately decided that Crash would be mute because they considered past voices for video game characters to be, quote, lame, negative, and distracting from the identification with them. Gavin and Rubin described Cortex to Zambellis as having a huge head but a tiny body. He's a mad scientist who dresses a bit like a Nazi from the Jetsons. Gavin owns Zambellis' original ink sketches of Crash, while Rubin owns the original sketches of Cortex. Cortex was originally envisioned as a self-aware video game character who was bothered by the cliches he embodied and addressed the audience throughout the game. This aspect was removed after Naughty Dog decided that cutscenes would disrupt the game's pacing. Cortex's right-hand man, Dr. Nitrous Brio, originally named Needy Brio, was developed as a foil. Aku Aku was originally conceived as an elderly human character who communicated through mumbles or only intelligible to Crash, in a manner similar to the dynamic between C-3PO and R2-D2 of the Star Wars franchise. His name originates from a Polynesian restaurant located near the Alafi station, which featured giant tiki statues out front. The Aku Aku masks that protect Crash were a late addition intended to balance the gameplay's difficulty. Because Cerny's initial suggestion of a translucent shield would have been technically impractical, the floating masks were created as a low-polygon alternative. The boss characters, Ripperoo and Papu Papu, create opportunities for Naughty Dog's animators to implement such features as overlapping action and jiggling fat, respectively. The former also served as a humorous demonstration of the dangers of the Cortex Vortex. Pinstripe Potoroo and Tana, originally named Carmen, were respectively inspired by The Godfather and actress Pamela Anderson, though Tana's design was scaled back to be a little less provocative. The Komodo brothers and Tiny Tiger, who would appear as boss characters in future games in the series, were originally created for the first game. On creating the levels for the game, Pearson's first sketched each environment, designing, creating additional individual elements later. Pearson aimed for an organic, overgrown look to the game and worked to completely avoid straight lines and 90-degree corners. A Naughty Dog artist sketched every single background object in the game before it was modeled. Naughty Dog's artists were tasked with making the best use of textures and reducing the amount of geometry. Dark and light elements were juxtaposed to create visual interest and separate geometry. The artists would squint with sketching texturing and playing the levels to make sure that they played by light value alone. They ensured to use color correctly by choosing mutually accentuating colors to the theme for the Lost City and Sunset Vista levels. The interior of Cortex's castle was designed to reflect his twisted mind. According to Rubin, the artist worked on the visuals for 8 months before the game code was written. Production on Crash Bandicoot used $100,000 Silicon Graphics-based workstations with an RIX-based tool pipeline, rather than $3,000 personal computers that were standard at that time. The PlayStation had 512 by 240 video mode, which used video memory normally reserved for textures, but also was efficient in rendering shaded polygons without texture. Ruben pointed out that since polygons on the characters were just a few pixels in size, shaded characters would look better than textured ones. Thus, polygon counts were emphasized over textures, which allowed the programmers to bypass the PlayStation's lack of texture correction or polygon clipping. To make the game look like an animated cartoon, vertex animation was implemented rather than the standard skeletal animation with a one-joint weighting, allowing the programmers to use the more sophisticated 3 to 4 joint weighting available in Power Animator. Because the PlayStation was unable to calculate this in real time, the location of each vertex was stored in each frame at 30 frames per second. Gavin, Baggett, and Cerny attempted to invent a compressor and assembly language for this manner of animation. Cerny's vision, although the most complicated, was the most successful of the three. The vertex animation method allowed Crash to display a much wider range of facial expressions than competing video game characters at the time. Ruben created Crash's model with 532 polygons and animated all the game's characters. Because Cortex's legs were too short for his game model to walk properly, he was kept stationary in merry appearances. To obtain the game's vast and detailed graphics, Ruben, Gavin, and Baggett researched visibility calculation in video games that followed Doom and concluded that extending the visibility pre-computations would allow the game to render a larger number of polygons. Following experimentation and free-roaming camera control, the team settled with a branching rail camera that would follow along next to, behind, or in front of Crash, generally looking at him, thus moving on a, quote, track through the world. Since only 900 polygons would be visible on the screen at a time, parts of the game's landscape were hidden by trees, cliffs, walls, and twists and turns in the environment. Gavin created procedural textures to overcome the lack of available texture memory. Each level in Crash Bandicoot contained 6 to 8 megabytes of textures. Baggett created two-way compressors that would reduce the 120 megabyte levels down to 12 megabytes and allow them to be compatible with the PlayStation's 2 megabyte random access memory. The levels proved to be so large that the first test level created could not be loaded on the Power Animator and had to be cut up into 16 pieces. Each piece took about 10 minutes to load on a 256 megabyte machine. To remedy the situation, Baggett called the DLE, Dave's Level Editor, a level design tool with which RGB values from a top-down map of a level are used to assemble level environments, with a succession of 10 to 15 layers from Adobe Photoshop indicating how the level's portions had to be combined. Rafi created nearly all the game's backgrounds. A pair of cutscenes featuring hand-drawn animation were produced by Universal Animation Studios to serve as the game's intro and outro, as well as act as a source of material for a potential animated series if the game was well received and commercially successful. The hand-drawn cutscenes were dropped after Sony Computer Entertainment picked up Crash Bandicoot for publication, as Sony desired to push the PlayStation's 3D polygonal graphics. The cutscenes were uploaded to YouTube by Siller in 2015. Naughty Dog made the early decision to design Crash Bandicoot as a classic action-based platform game as opposed to an open-world exploration-based game in order to fully render its environments in 3 dimensions. To code the characters and gameplay, Gavin and Baggett created the programming language Game-Oriented Object Lisp, GOOL, using Lisp syntax. The first 2 test levels created for the game were not integrated in the final version because they were too open and had too many polygons. During the summer of 1995, the team focused on creating levels that were both functional and fun, and used the Cortex factory levels to experiment on this goal. The mechanical setting allowed the team to forego the complex and organic forest designs and distill the 2-axis gameplay. The first 2 functional levels, Heavy Machinery and Generator, utilized 2.5D gameplay and featured basic techniques previously used in Donkey Kong Country, such as steam vents, drop platforms, bouncy pads, heated pipes, and enemy characters that move back and forth, all arranged in increasingly difficult combinations as the level progresses. Crash's jumping and spinning attacks were refined in these 2 levels. The Cortex Power level incorporates the original Sonic's ass point of view, behind a character and over his shoulder, featured in 2 test levels. After working on these 3 levels, the first operational jungle-themed level, Jungle Rollers, was created from the pieces of the first failed test level arranged into a quarter between the trees. Afterward, 2 to 3 levels would be developed for each environmental theme created, with the first level featuring an introductory set of challenges, and later levels adding new obstacles such as dropping and moving platforms in the second jungle-themed level to increase the difficulty. The level layouts and gameplay mechanics were generally not drawn out of paper beforehand and were largely the result of trial and error by the Naughty Dog team. Siller created sketches and summaries to document the results, but later used the documents to claim credit for the game's designs and mechanics. After developing the core gameplay, Naughty Dog realized that there were many empty areas in the game due to PlayStation's inability to generate multiple enemies on screen. In an attempt to remedy this, they created the Wumpa Fruit item in 3 dimensions by means of a series of textures, but that was not considered sufficiently exciting. On a Saturday in January 1996, Gavin and Ruben conceived the crate mechanic, reasoning that crates would be made up of a low amount of polygons and multiple types of which could be combined to interesting effect. Gavin coded the crates while Ruben modeled some basic crates as well as an exploding TNT crate and drew quick textures. The first crates were integrated into the game 6 hours later, and many more were produced during the following days. By February 1996, over 20 levels had been created, which were in various stages of completion. Kurosaki designed 3/4 of the game's levels. One of the last levels he created was Stormy Ascent, which was roughly 4 times longer than the other levels. Although Stormy Ascent was fully playable, Naughty Dog deemed the level too difficult and lacked the time to make it easier and decided to cut it from the game before submitting the Gold Master to Sony. Because removing the level completely was considered too risky, Stormy Ascent was left hidden within the disc and accessible to play via Game Shark. Stormy Ascent was later recreated by Vicarious Visions, released as downloadable content for the Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy on July 20, 2017. The music for Crash Bandicoot was a last-minute aspect added to the game before its showing at E3. Siller proposed that rather than conventional music, Gavin could create an urban chaotic symphony where random sound effects such as bird vocalizations, vehicle horns, grunts, and flatulence would be combined. After Naughty Dog rejected this proposal, Siller introduced them to the music production company Mutaro Mazaka and its founder Mark Mothersbaugh. According to Siller, Mutaro Mazuka joined production after speaking with Siller without Naughty Dog being consulted, which resulted in an angry confrontation between Ruben and Siller. Cerny removed Siller from production following this incident. The music was composed by Josh Mansell and produced by Baggett. Mansell's initial tracks for the game were manic and hyperactive before Baggett decided him toward more ambient compositions. The sound effects were created by Mike Golem, Ron Horwitz, and Kevin Spears of Universal Sound Studios. The sound of Ripperoo's maniacal chortling is a sample of a hyena voiced by Dallas McKinnon from Lady and the Tramp. The voice acting was provided by Brendan O'Brien, who came in contact with Ruben through Pearson and recorded his dialogue before the Universal Studios lot's Hitchcock's Theater. In September 1995, Andy Gavin and Taylor Kurosaki used the latter's connections to the Sequest DSV crew, spent 2 days in the series editing bay, creating a 2-minute demo film, and gave it to a friend who would show it to Sony Computer Entertainment. Sony appreciated the demonstration, but internal management issues meant that Sony would not sign an agreement with Universal Interactive to publish the game until March of 1996. While preparing for the game's demonstration at the 1996 E3, the team decided to finally rename the title character Crash Bandicoot, a name credited to Kurosaki and Dave Baggett. The character's name was based on his species and the visceral reaction to his destruction of boxes. The names of Dash, Smash, and Bash were also considered. Universal Interactive's marketing director contested the name and objected to the character Tawna for her perceived sexist nature. While Naughty Dog was able to retain the Crash Bandicoot name after threatening to leave production, they chose to omit Tawna from subsequent entries in the series based both on this experience and to appease the desire of Sony's Japanese market team for a more girlish female supporting character. Universal Interactive, in an attempt to take credit for Crash Bandicoot, notified Naughty Dog that they were not allowed to attend E3. In addition, leaked copies of the temporary box cover and press materials for E3 omitted the Naughty Dog logo, in violation of the contract between Naughty Dog and Universal Interactive. In response to this provocation, Jason Rubin drafted and printed 1,000 copies of a document entitled Naughty Dog, creator and developer of Crash Bandicoot, to hand out in front of the Crash Bandicoot display at E3. Beforehand, Rubin passed out the flyers for review to Universal Interactive, angering its president. Crash Bandicoot was first shown in E3 in May of 1996 and was met with enthusiastic reactions. Crash Bandicoot was displayed at the front of the Sony's booth at E3, replacing the original choice of Twisted Metal. Amori Matsumori Bellari of Sony served as the marketing manager for Crash Bandicoot and worked in collaboration with Eric Moore and Chris Graves of TBWA Chiat Day to create the game's advertising campaign. Moe and Graves, recognizing that Sony sought to establish itself as a challenger to Nintendo, conceived the idea of Crash Bandicoot, inspired a crazed fan to create a Crash outfit and harass Mario from Nintendo's parking lot. The team set a rule against insinuating that the video game character and the costume person in the advertisement were the same individual, as the two entities had different personalities. As the marketing team went to Seattle to film the commercial, they created a smaller teaser depicting the fans' journey to Nintendo. The commercial was shot near a Nintendo building, but not the main Nintendo headquarters, which Matsumura Belair felt aligned with the company's humor. She remarked that it would totally make sense if this guy hadn't done his homework and hadn't mistakenly gone to the wrong building. An additional commercial featuring Sega was considered but never created due to increasing expenses. The development of Crash Bandicoot spanned a total of 18 months. It was released in North America on September 9th, 1996, and in Europe on November 8th, 1996. Give you a little bit more gameplay here. This will bring an end to episode 2 of the Classic and Current Gaming Podcast. We went over Crash Bandicoot today. Each week we do a different game. You can find these all on YouTube here. We're going to continue on doing this week after week. If there's a game you're interested in us highlighting for you, comment in the link below and we'll see if we can't get a podcast episode up for you. We're open to all kinds of suggestions with that. We do all kinds of other content here on YouTube as well. We have gameplay videos. We have the monthly Hall of Fame inductions that we do. And if you want to see us live, we're on Twitch with some additional live content. We are usually live every morning, so you can check us out over on Twitch as well. As always, thank you for being here. It's been RxDude22 from Classic and Current Gaming signing out. Keep on gaming. See you on the next stream. Be good to each other. Everybody have a great day, and we'll see you next week with episode 3 of the Classic and Current Gaming Podcast.